From results so poor that they got him fired, to the Toronto Raptors already having 3 names in contention for his job, here's why Nick Nurse received his marching orders from the Raptors, and what it means for the franchise. Well, given the poor season in terms of results, Nurse was lucky to survive until the end of the season. Unfulfilled expectations and a team that just stagnated throughout the entire campaign. The Raptors had no choice but to get rid of Nick Nurse. Ultimately, it was a big decision, given the fact that he's the only coach to deliver a championship to the Raptors. But it was a long time coming, too. Toronto failed to make the playoffs in 2 of the last 3 seasons, and with the many shortcomings this season, from poor defense to low-energy plays, to bouts of selfishness and a lack of development for the younger talent, it's actually easier to count the things that were right with the team rather than what went wrong. The cracks were beginning to appear in the foundations since the end of that shortened season, and that Tampa season was probably the beginning of the end for Nick Nurse.
I don't think so. I think that happened last year. I think it happens a lot, right? I think, from my standpoint.
Yeah, definitely. In the absence of Serge Ibaka and Marc Gasol, there was no defensive identity for the Raptors. The offense struggled to get going, and then Nurse's clash with Pascal Siakam exposed the underlying troubles. Fans, though, wrote that season off completely, understandably as well, given the last 2 seasons had been fantastic, and the Raptors had been playing on the road for the entire campaign due to the COVID restrictions. Nurse managed to get the team back up immediately in the following season, and while they were pretty good without any traditional big man or superstar, winning 48 games and taking the Sixers to 6 games. The truth of the matter is, Nurse's coaching toolkit was heavily exposed. Yes, I agree that he wasn't given a great roster either this season, but the failure for the 2022-23 season is as much on Nurse as it is on Masai Ujiri, the president of the Raptors. Like, how do you even explain the slow start and all the rumblings of discord and selfishness? This sort of stuff is up for the head coach to sort out, but it seems that Nurse had lost his control over the team. Then you factor in the inconsistency and the way they rolled over in the play-in, and it's clear that firing Nurse was the right call. Now, it's important to understand that the NBA, like all pro sports, is a results-driven league, heavily competitive, and even if the good outweighs the bad, the general consensus always comes down to the simple question: what have you done for me lately? For that reason alone, you look to the just wrapped up season, and the decision becomes relatively easier. That said, the question that needed to be asked is, could Nurse have gotten better results going forward with this roster? Probably, but that doesn't mean Nurse is a bad coach either. No sir. See, the organization did a massive disservice to Nurse by not addressing an extremely flawed roster. Like, what was even the point of bringing in another 6'9" wing in Otto Porter Jr. instead of getting a backup point guard? What was the point of letting the likes of O'Shea Brissett and Ish Wainwright walk? So both these statements can be true. Nurse is a great coach and will become the hottest candidate on the market, but his time with the Raptors had to end because he'd lost the dressing room. This takes us to the next question: who will replace Nurse? Well, as per the latest rumors, there are 3 leading candidates for the difficult job in Toronto. First up, the most obvious name, and the one who is the favorite to take over the job: Ime Udoka. Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN reported that the former Celtics coach was a serious candidate, and given the reports from Toronto Star's Doug Smith, it seems that the Raptors front office likes Udoka very much. Bringing in Udoka will definitely be a controversial move, given the way he was let go by the Celtics for his improper consensual relationship with a female member. But from a coaching standpoint, it would be a fantastic move. He knows how to connect with the players on a personal level, getting the most out of them, and how the development of certain players has stagnated in Toronto. Udoka might just be the perfect man to get the best out of players like Scotty Barnes and others. But if healthy relationship with star players is what the Raptors are looking for in their next coach, then Earl Watson could be a shrewd move too. He knows the organization inside out, joining the Canadian franchise as an assistant coach in 21, and Watson's charismatic personality allowed him to get get close to core players like OG Anunoby, Fred VanVleet, and Pascal Siakam. Watson led the Phoenix Suns for major parts over the course of 3 seasons, and Devin Booker remains a big fan of the former Suns coach, crediting him for helping him become the player he is today. Given Ujiri's comments in light of the Nurse firing, it seems like the franchise is also adamant on making player development a priority, and that's something which could go in favor of Watson because he's great with it. But given the mass exodus awaiting the Raptors, Watson could potentially leave the franchise altogether as well. Talking about assistant coaches who've worked with the Raptors before, Sergio Scariolo seems to be another interesting choice. He's got some winning experience, taking the Spanish national team to 4 Eurobasket championships and a World Cup. The 62-year-old Italian currently serves the Spanish national side and Virtus Bologna in Italy's top league, guiding them to their first Euro Cup and helping them win the league. He's one of those coaches with a golden touch. But the question is, will the Raptors be willing to experiment with someone who doesn't have a lot of NBA experience? That said, the future isn't exactly too bright for the Raptors, and not just because of Nurse's firing, but because there's a lot of important decisions that need to be made by the front office. For instance, what do they do with Fred VanVleet and OG Anunoby? This was one of the worst individual seasons for VanVleet, shooting a career-low 34% from the deep. His shot-making cost the Raptors big time in important moments. And while his game picked up toward the end of the season with Jakob Poeltl's introduction, is it a good idea to re-sign the 29-year-old in free agency? Regardless of what the Raptors decide to do with him, they'll need to address the shortage they have in the guards department, and will need to bring in someone who can start firing from the first minute. Similarly, there's a big question looming over the future of Anunoby as well. As good as he is, and the strides that he's taken this season, is he capable of becoming someone who can create his own offense? Is he good enough to become a star player? One thing's for sure, he's very good and can offer a lot on the defensive end and the offensive end. So will it be a better idea to trade him while his stock is still on the rise and get in other players who fix the Raptors in the short term and in the long term? It may be a better idea to cash out and find another star player to play alongside Poeltl and Siakam, but that's not the only concern. Player development also remains a major issue. Scottie Barnes did not break out the way the Raptors were expecting him to, and given he's expected to get the franchise tag, the Raptors need to find a way to get the most out of him. Similarly, the likes of Precious Achiuwa, Malachi Flynn, and Delano Banton are extraordinary talents. They need to be invested in, and the Raptors need to get a coaching unit that can get the best out of them. Ultimately, the future hinges on Masai Ujiri and what moves he makes after the Nick Nurse firing, and how he sorts out the Raptors' flawed roster. And that's all I have on the Nick Nurse firing and what it means for the Toronto Raptors.